Hi, today I'm going to show you how you can turn a plain 1x4 board into rustic barnwood. Then I'm going to use that to make a picture frame. Let's get started. I'm using a standard 1x4 board found at my local home center. I made sure to pick the straightest board I could find, as well as a board that has a lot of grain to it. I started out by cutting the boards into more manageable pieces using my chop saw, but a circular saw or even a hand saw will do the trick as well. I decided to thin the boards down to 3 inches using my table saw. This is optional. I could have just bought a 1x3 board at my local home center, but I already had the 1x4 boards in my shop. Now that I have my 4 sides cut to rough length, I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle on one side of each board. Here, I'm using my table saw with a miter jig, but if you don't have a table saw, this type of cut can be made with a chop saw or a simple miter box with a hand saw. The picture that I have for this frame is 13.5 inches by 38.5 inches. I'll be using my palm router with a 3/8 inch rabbiting bit to make a groove in the back of the frame for the acrylic and picture to sit in. So I want the inside of my picture frame to overlap my picture by 3/8 of an inch all the way around. Since it's hard to get a tape measure on an angled cut board, I like to use this little trick to get my dimensions. I line up the miter cut board so that the inside part of the angle is lined up with a straight edge on my workbench. Then I can simply use my workbench to hold my tape measure while I get the exact dimension. I repeat this process for the perpendicular side. Once I have 2 sides measured out, I use them as a reference to mark the other 2 sides. I can then make my final miter cut on each board. Now that I have all the sides cut, it's time for the fun part. I laid the sides flat on my workbench and then I reach for anything that can cause some serious dents in the boards. I find that crowbars and hammers work great for this. Scratches and dents add to the more rustic look I'm going for. I also used a handsaw and I made some screw holes to add even more character. Next, I used a propane torch found at my local home center to raise the grain of the wood. I very carefully hovered over the board to lightly burn the surface of the wood. It doesn't take much and it was much quicker than I thought it would be. Now, if you're not comfortable using a torch, then it's okay. This process isn't completely necessary because you can still get a similar look without using a torch. However, I feel you get a much better end result when you raise the grain by burning it because it'll actually harden the grain and make the next step much easier. And let's be honest, it's more fun using fire. The next step is to remove the soft part of the wood between the grains. You can use a handheld bristle brush for this process, but I find it much quicker and easier to use a spinny bristle brush thingy that can go inside a drill. This can be picked up at your local home center. I went over all the burnt surfaces. Clamping the boards down really made this much easier. Be warned, this is a very messy process. After cleaning up the wood, I noticed that a lot of the ding marks I put in earlier wasn't as noticeable anymore, so I added some more. Then I went over all the boards with 80 grit sandpaper to eliminate any splinters that could pop out. Now it's time to add color. Since I'm going for an old barnwood look, the colors I'm using are white and red paint with gray and brown early American stain. These are the colors I chose, but there are a lot more color combinations that you can use to fit your needs. I will also leave the tools and materials I used down in the description. I started by putting white paint in random parts of the board, followed by red paint. I did let the white paint dry for a few minutes because I didn't want the red mixing into a pink color. I then went over any bare spots in the wood with early American stain, followed by gray stain. After the paint had a chance to dry, I went back to the spinny bristle brush. Here, I'm concentrating on areas where there are color transitions to try and blend them together better. And you don't have to worry, you can't mess this part up. If you take off more paint than you wanted to, you can always add more in the next step. Once I had all my desired paint removed, I went over the entire boards with the brown early American stain again, and then wiped the boards with a clean, dry cloth. I also made sure I got into all the nooks and crannies. I wanted to add a little more character, so I printed out a stencil text on the computer and used an X-Acto knife to cut the letters out. I started to put the picture frame together, and when I did, I still wanted to make some changes. I sprayed a few spots with the black spray paint, and I wanted to tone down the white areas and give it more of a grayer look. So I hit those areas up again with the spinny bristle brush. I added more grain stain and then topped everything off again with the brown early American stain. Now that everything had a chance to dry, I really liked how it looked, and I want to show you the texture of the piece of wood. Here's a plain 1x4 board, still smooth. And here is what the board looks like with the grain raised and the soft parts of the wood have been scraped away. As I scrape my finger across the board, you can tell there is a lot of texture to this wood that really makes it look rustic and old. Now it's time to start assembling the picture frame. Here I use pocket holes, but if you don't have a pocket hole jig, you can buy picture frame wood joiner hooks that connect two pieces of wood. They are super easy and you just need a hammer to use them. Since my picture frame is rather large, I decided to use pocket holes because they do make a rather strong joint and they help clamping the two ends together. Plus, the pocket holes are going to be in the back of the picture frame and nobody will ever see them. Next, I use my palm router with a rabbiting bit to make a groove in the back of the picture frame, and I need to go deep enough for the acrylic, picture, and backer to sit in. I do this in 3 light passes rather than 1 large pass. I chiseled out the corners to make a nice 90-degree angle. Now I was ready to cut the acrylic. I have to admit I was a little nervous at first because I never cut acrylic before, but it was pretty easy and painless on the table saw. I just took my time and got a nice clean cut. I used cardboard for the backer board and it worked just fine. I assembled everything together and used a hammer and finishing nails to hold everything in place to the picture frame. I purchased a picture frame wire kit at my local home center to mount to the back of the frame. I just attached the 2 mounting brackets using the provided screws and then secured the wire to each bracket. And now this picture frame is ready to be hung. I'm very happy with how this turned out. This is a pretty easy project that anyone can do, and this process can be used in many different ways and not just a picture frame. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can show your support by hitting the thumbs up button, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe. That's all for today. We'll see you on the next one.